What up? What up? It's the man Sean P coming in live. This is the Sean P Experience on YouTube. How y'all doing out there? I have another amazing, phenomenal guest lined up for you guys. This is very unique and very special. I try my best to bring unique guests on a regular basis. This show is no exception, man. I have the amazing, scholarly author, one of the leading founders of the Zora Neale Hurston Trust. My sister Ray Chesney in the building. How you doing, my friend?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I am fantastic. We had a little technology glitch. Tech gonna do tech, right? But we're gonna overcome that. We're gonna rise above that, man. I am doing great. I'm glad to be here with you. How was your day today? Before we get started.
It's good. It was sunny and 66 yesterday. Today
Woo-hoo,
is
woo-hoo.
raining and 40. So it's a good
Wow.
reminder how little
Yeah.
control we have in life.
Yeah.
And the
Hey,
technology added to that,
you
right?
know, yes. You got to be able to adjust, adapt, overcome. The military taught me that one thing: adjust, adapt, overcome. So
I love
we're
that.
gonna adjust and adapt right now, right? So my first question I love to give my guests. This show is called "Sitting with the Griots," the
Hmm.
storytellers, right? How do you feel about having the moniker of being a modern day griot? You're an author, and then what you're doing with the Zora Trust, bringing these stories to a new generation, a new crowd,
Yeah.
bringing that legacy. How you feel about that moniker, and does it feel like any pressure or?
I can't say it feels like a lot of pressure because I kind of happened into my Zora work completely on accident. I'll call it divine alignment. Because when I was assigned her book, Their Eyes Are Watching God, which is right behind me, I didn't read it. I was assigned the book in my high school AP English class. Did not read the book. I grew up a very reluctant reader, but always loved to tell stories. But I didn't have the interest of adults around me to encourage like that storytelling. Even my granddad, he might listen, while we were driving home after school, but just like I didn't have this network of adults who were like, yes, like take that somewhere, do something with it. And so I think I rebelled a little bit against reading for that very reason. I was like, y'all want me to read everybody else's story, listen to everybody else's story, but when does my voice matter? That was one. And the other thing was we didn't have a lot of representation in children's literature at all. And a lot of the books, if they did have representation for African Americans, for us Black folk, it was usually like picture book biographies of Harriet Tubman and Dr. Martin Luther King. And I was like, where are the fictional Black characters that go on adventures and like live like I do? And so I rebelled. I remember I had to be about 8, I think, and my dad used to bribe me and my sister. Well, he bribed me, my sister wanted to go to the library in Detroit, where I'm from, the main branch, on Saturdays. And he'd be like, if we go, we'll get McDonald's after. So I'm like, cool, because that was the only way he was going to get me to go. But I walked up to the children's librarian and I asked her, I was like, where are all the books with the cool Black kids that go on adventures, right? Like we looking at Harry Potter and even like, I think in my time, um, the Chronicles of Narnia was big. And my sister, she's 3 years older than me. She was an avid reader, but I was not. And I'm like, where is it at? My dad dragged me out of there so quick. But I don't think it's pressure because this journey has been super unexpected for me. Super unexpected. So it's kind of writing itself.
You unpack so much right there to be able to tease with. I love that. But I want to start with this. You being an early reluctant reader, and now you're the Zora Neale Hurst Trust person. You're the Zora scholar, right? When I
Mhm,
not interviewed, but when I had a Q&A with Dr. Ibram X. Kendi at his book event,
mhm.
my question to him was, in his early story of his life, he was the same way.
Yep.
And now he's one of the leading like Black intellects on TV. You seeing Dr. Ibram X. Kendi on everything, right? So it's like, what do you advise these parents that saying, man, my child not wanting to read right now? Man, my child not really in the school, not really in the books. How do you advise them or keep them encouraged with their children is my question.
Yeah, Dr. Kendi is hilarious. He said his parents still tease him to this day that he's an author and prolific author at that, that he writes so many books and he grew up not liking to read. Some of my advice, and that's actually where I started. I quit my corporate job at 25 and was like, there has to be something else. And I found a story I had written in 5th grade. And I was like, oh, yeah, I did like to write. I had like completely let go of writing for what I thought I was supposed to do in life. And so I was like, I wonder if I can still write. And I wrote a book called Nico and the Trouble Bubble for my 2 year. He was 2 at the time, and I think he's turning like 13 or 14 this year. It's crazy. But when I started writing those stories again, I wanted to change the landscape for children when it came to literacy. And so in 2015, I was visiting a local church in Detroit, dropping off some books, and actually to a deacon. And Deacon Curry said, "What have you been up to?" I said, "I got this idea for a program that connects all learning to children's books, but they got to have diverse characters." And the gotcha was it was my children's books, right? And so I thought I had this hypothesis. It was very messy at that point. But if children had literature that represented them visually and content wise, and it was developmentally appropriate, then it would unlock their minds to engage with any other type of learning. And I still believe that today, right? I think that our children, first off, they deserve a lot of grace, and we deserve a lot of grace, even as adults, because when you don't have representation, children's books is very deceptive, right? We think like, oh, that's cute as children's books. But children's books open our mind to the world around us and teach us how we relate to the world around us and vice versa. So, first day of school, you think about like Junie B. Jones, right? And you have like this whole series of this little girl, and she gets to get in trouble. She's always very mischievous, but you get to see how the adults adapt and adjust to her and how she functions in these environments. But if you don't have any representations of yourself like that, you start behind a finish line at the very beginning of school, right? I'm from Michigan where preschool, or not preschool, kindergarten isn't even required, right? So in my summer camps that I started from scratch with, yeah, it's like,
I've
I think
never heard that.
it's a bunch,
I've
yes, a bunch of
never.
states that do not require kindergarten. But when we look at the demographics in Detroit, for example, you have one of the worst economic systems, right? High unemployment, high one of the highest cities for car insurance. So if I have to choose between getting a ticket and taking my baby to kindergarten and it's not required, I'm probably not. So in these summer camps, these I would have 120 kids K through 6, and I would make activities for them connected to the theme and the characters in my children's books. And it unlocked their minds. Like I was teaching kindergartners physics, right? But this worked because they were like, "Oh, I love Nico." They connected with Nico first. They connected with the fact that Nico loved bubbles and he was getting into troubles with this trouble bubble. And then they're like, "We can do math." But I always remembered for the great majority of them, it was their first experience in a classroom. And so I think, especially with our children, our Black and brown children, we have to remember the way that the matriculation through education is supposed to work. There are missing steps already for us. And so how do we fill that in? Even my son, I'm pretty sure he's brilliant. He's in gifted school, everything. He is brilliant and he's 7, but reading is not his first love. Instead of forcing him to read, I'm always trying to figure out different ways to adapt it to the world around him so it's useful to him, right? So one of the things, YouTube, parents like, my kid always watch YouTube. I taught him how to spell using YouTube. Because if he want to watch a show, you got to be able to search for it. And I'm not going to keep spelling it for you. Things like that, things like very small in writing, we do them like writing sprints where you get yourself like 15 minutes to write. We get to school 10, 15 minutes early. We're reading folklore right now. We read that right before school, and he's thinking like, oh, this is really quick. Funny enough, now he loves doing that. I would have never thought reading in the car with him would be where he loved it. Things like he would rather read a chapter book than a children's book. And so open it up so it's not just, hey, this is what it looks like, this is where it happens. Open it up in the world around them and what they care about.
Wow. Everything you just said was so creative and innovative and dynamic. And I think the parents watching this, the parents need to hear that because most of our generation, we had this certain box of what's education, what's
Yeah.
reading, what's school. We got to break that mold. Like, I always called myself a non-reader. And I think back on my childhood being an athlete, I was always in Sports Illustrated, Slam
Yeah.
magazine. Being a hip hop head, I was always in Double XL, The Source, but I didn't see it as a book. I was
Mm-hmm.
still reading words. I'm still reading
Yes.
expert journalism.
Mm-hmm.
There's phenomenal journalists writing at these publications. I'm still reading good sentences and good paragraphs. I didn't see it like that. I had to rethink my mind on
Yep.
my early childhood of reading. So we got to all, you said, have grace.
Mm-hmm.
The wonderful word you just used, that grace word. We need that for our children.
Yeah.
Yes,
And I
yes.
mean, even for Cam, like he loved to be in the kitchen with me, being an entrepreneur. He was home with me as a baby, reading recipes. Like it's seeing his evolution starting out with me telling him what the words are and us sounding them out and connecting it to the actual ingredients that go into the recipes. So now like he be telling me, he be like, you need 1/4 cup of sugar. And he be spot on. And so there's so many ways, just like you said, do not villainize or ostracize the children because they're interested in things that you are not interested in. I be having to read about Beyblades and Among Us, but that we have to meet them where they are, right?
And like you said, today's generation actually is so I want to say the word innately brilliant. Meaning, when I see my little infant cousins, their ability to really have their little head still and focus on their mama's iPad or a phone, and they early clicking on stuff, sliding.
Can't even
Like
talk. And no,
how do you even know? How do you
yeah,
even know to go and click on this certain app? I'm watching a little kid 2 days ago. He had a little iPad, right? He's 3 years old. I'm trying to do it for him, thinking he can't do it. He click, click, swipe, click. He playing the game. He doing his thing. He restarting it when he loses. I'm like, he's not even
yeah,
in school yet. So these
yeah.
kids naturally have this thing. We just got to be able to creatively feed them, little nuggets along as they doing what they're doing. I think that's the kind of the newer wave of having to teach our kids and there's all this technology around them, man.
Yeah, and I mean my biggest thing, like I'm a huge advocate for teachers and for education. But please, 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 if I don't tell you nothing else, you don't listen to nothing else, do not depend on school to educate your child because they are not just even if you go into a classroom and volunteer, the very best teacher, the dynamics of a classroom, the diverse levels of aptitude, the different educational cultural backgrounds they come from at home. Like spend some time and it doesn't have to be a ton of time, but just spend time with your kids so you can observe them and see what they want and they're interested in. Hmm.
So I
That's
want to, I want to, I want to circle the wagon to come back around, right? So once again, I want to say, what was your introduction to Zora, and when did the light bulb come on to you? Like, you know what, I'm taking this thing further. Because for you, it's like a life journey, a life path. It's
yeah.
not a pastime. It's not a hobby. You really,
No.
really carry that flag, right? But also, I want to hear about you becoming officially Christian, the Zora Neale Hurston scholar. That's a big deal. So give us that kind of a trajectory if you can.
So with the babies, I mean, I owe everything to the babies. I was doing a summer camp in Detroit and I started it from scratch. First off, the children, they just impressed me so much. Like the first year, because I like to do the free form. I like to see what they interested in and also challenge myself to learn as well. And just like hang out with the kids because they are innately brilliant. I think we all come here like that. It just has to be nurtured and we have to have a space for it. And so the first year we did summer camp, they turned one of my books into a play. I've never even been in a play. The babies did. Fifth and sixth graders were the thespians, the young thespians, and the third and fourth graders designed the set and the costumes with the sewing ministry. It was wild. And summer camp was 3 weeks, and they
That's
did this in 3 weeks.
that's incredible.
Yeah, and so it was
My
wild.
God.
Michigan State, and actually the story, the book that they turned into a play was the one I had written in fifth grade. At the time, it had to be for a vocabulary assignment called, and it was called A Lesson in Interdependence. And so it became the Adventures of the Ruler Twins. It's out of print now, but it became the Adventures of the Ruler Twins, and they turned it into a play. The community was involved. Okay, you like
Give me a timeout. Give me a timeout, sis. We need a reprint. We need a republication of this, my sister. But keep
Listen,
going. I digress.
yeah. And so Michigan State University actually caught wind of what I was doing. And in 2016, they started sending their students down to run an after school program, which was adapted from summer camp. And those students were so amazing that when I was pregnant with my son, they actually ran the program so I could go on maternity leave, which was wild. And so that was 2016, 2017. He was like, the professor who was the liaison for Michigan State, he was like, my students love you, your students love you. We've never seen anything like this program. Why don't you come to campus next year and do a Black History presentation? So it would have been for a 2018 series. And I was like, on what? And he said, the person who most influenced your career as a writer. Now, at that time, I was harboring the secret, and this is probably why I connect with kids so much. Probably most people, but especially kids. At that moment, I didn't know that it was special or it was unique or it was like my superpower. I did not love the fact. I felt shame that I was still a reluctant reader. And this is me at 28. I was still a reluctant reader. Other than reading board books to my kid, I was still a reluctant reader. And just like we were talking, I think we were talking offline, the idea of what's a writer and what's a reader, I would be researching like crazy neuroscience and brain development so I could better understand the children I was serving. But you couldn't get me to read no full 200, 250 page book. It just wasn't happening. But the professor, Dr. Kevin L. Brooks, he said these magic words. You ready for this, Sean P? He said, "We will pay you an honorarium." I was like, oh, I feel inspired. It's coming back to me.
Well, all the magic I need, talk about the Strange, Dr. Strange, like,
Listen, I'm a storyteller. I was like, listen, I could put something together. I feel very inspired. But I actually picked Langston Hughes because I was thinking I'm Black, I'm a writer, the Harlem Renaissance. It makes sense. Langston was the king of the Harlem Renaissance. I could brush up on some poetry real quick. But as I was researching him, I felt no personal connection to him whatsoever. And I have theories about that. You know, he had to wear a lot of masks and chose to wear a lot of masks in his time. And I just didn't have a feel a connection with him or to him as a person. But Zora Neale Hurston kept popping up. Now, remind you, there I was watching God. It was assigned in high school. I did not read the book. I did not read the book. And I'm like, wait, that lady whose book I didn't read? And I'm finding these facts starting to go down a rabbit hole. And it's crazy. I'm coming up with these facts. Like, first off, she and Langston Hughes were best friends during the Harlem Renaissance. She was a trained anthropologist in 1927 and 1928, traveling the very racist American South to collect and preserve our cultural artifacts that we still rely on today to understand our history. The fact that she revolutionized anthropology because at that time everything was done at a distance, right? So you didn't live amongst your subjects, and your subjects definitely were not your own people. Zora revolutionized that. She grew up in the first all-Black incorporated municipality in the history of the United States, Eatonville, Florida, August 18th, 1887. And her father was mayor 3 times of that town and helped write some of the town's laws that still are in place today. And so I was like, how come ain't nobody talk about Zora, but everybody talk about Langston? Then I was like, how come I'm not talking about Zora? So that first year, I actually added her on to the presentation because I had already submitted Langston. And so it was Langston and Zora, which, if you know, that was probably like the biggest sin ever. So I'm like 2 strikes in with Zora, right? Didn't read her book, and now it's and Zora. But I was very excited talking about her, not so much about Langston. And I said, I like whispered a little apology to her, like, my bad. But if I ever get to do this again, like, you will be the star of my show. And she has been since. Like, it's been a wild, wild ride. I had no idea I was a Zora Neale Hurston scholar. A couple of people told me, like, yeah, you're researching her and you know a lot about her. And I was like, let me kind of try it on for size. But it was her hometown, Eatonville, Florida, and her family who told me I was a Zora Neale Hurston scholar, which is wild. And I'll work for her family via the
see,
trust.
We live in a day and time where so many folks want to self-appoint themselves on these titles and these things. You know, I'm so and so. It's something else whenever somebody else gives you the moniker. Somebody else Christians you. That's official right there.
Yeah.
That's not self-appointed. That's official.
Yeah. I can't complain. Like it has been it's the honor of a lifetime. I would have never. I feel like I'm the most unexpected Zora Neale Hurston scholar ever, but I think that there is power in that because, and I think she probably. So me and Zora. Here's the other thing. Me researching her was not like research when I think about traditional scholars or going. I'm not affiliated with any university or anything like that. It was no training, nothing like that. It was just me sitting there with a baby in my arms, starting to research Zora, and I mean, I think she left me like golden nuggets, and she does. Now I'm clear on it, but this is from 2018. I was very doubtful that I was supposed to do anything with Zora because I'm thinking it's Zora, like she the queen of the Harlem Renaissance. Their eyes are watching God, but that February 2018, that same year, my best friend's wife won a free vacation to Florida for that summer. And they already had a vacation planned. So he was like, y'all want this vacation? Like, who gives you a free vacation, right? And so, so we go down
So
to
wait,
Florida.
you get paid, you got vacations. I mean, it's just blessings on
They'll let me
blessings,
listen,
blessings
it's a
on blessings.
blessing. But baby, it was listen, y'all. Don't let me make this sound like it's just some clear, easy road. Cause I was very
No,
like, what
no.
is this? Cause I get down there, right? We get down there, and the first place we get to go is Orlando. Next stop is Daytona. But Orlando, I keep seeing the signs for Eatonville. And this is why I love doing sense of place research because Zora immortalized Eatonville in so much of her work, like 95% of her work, she's talking about Eatonville. Eatonville is the setting. And so, in my mind, especially as a novelist and a short story writer, I'm thinking, like, okay, cool, Eatonville. But being like seeing the signs for it, my brain was like, it's a real place. I had not put that together in the real world that Eatonville still existed.
That's interesting because I know some of the like Toni Morrison for an example, right? They're writing in some of these settings in different stories, but it's not a real place. But
Yeah,
Edenville being a literal place, landmark, that's
yeah.
big. Big.
Yeah, and I'm there like 2 or 3 times a year now, but we took a detour to go into Eatonville, and it's just like so many looking back, I love all the this is my artist creative side. I love all the numbers and all the signs. So the original Zora Neale Hurston Museum in Eatonville was at 227 East Kennedy. 227 is my birthday. The the annual Zora Fest
No,
that
hold
they
on, hold on. I don't want to cut nobody off on this. God, you
you cut
serious?
me out.
It's crazy.
Yeah, hold on one second.
What's the chances of that? What are the odds, man? What are the
Yeah,
odds?
and then even more so than that, the annual Zora Fest that they have in Eatonville, we're the same exact age. So every year it happens in January. And so this past January is the 35th annual Zora Neale Hurston Festival. I was 35, and then 227, I turned 36. And so there were like these signs, and I went into the museum. And I was just like, yeah, like maybe there is something. But really, what happened is I went across the street to the library and I asked the woman working at the front desk if she knew anything about Zora. And at that time, they didn't have their markers up or anything like that. And so she was like, yeah, not really. We have some of her books. And I was like, oh, it's work for me to do. Like, this is her hometown and they don't know, so it's a lot of work to do. And so now I actually play on a flat screen TV. They got like a little Zora kiosk there, and I play on a loop in her hometown, which is wild. It's
Hey,
just
here's why.
wild. Wild.
This is why the work that we're doing is important, right? People sometimes ask, why are you harping on the past? Why are you harping on this history? It's so long ago, right? But like for example, my homeboy in Chicago, he's a a postman and stuff like that, right? He sometimes stop and show me, look, Sean, this is where Fred Hampton lived. This is where so and so lived. This is where so and so died. This is where so and so grave is. But the residents of Chicago just walk by like they're not paying homage. They're not giving honor. There is no memorial or a mural or something like that in these landmarks. Like it's on us to highlight these spaces and places. It's on us to make our children pause and give reverence. When I was a child growing up, being in Louisiana, when you drive by the graveyard, you turn the radio down. When you walk by the graveyard, you don't curse or you don't do nothing by the graveyard until you pass by the grave. That's old school. We got to get that reverence back to our places, locations, and spaces, man.
Yeah, and I think it's important of how we connect, right? So one of the big things for me, one of the huge things for me is if I'm standing in front of an audience, like me as a Zora Neale Hurston scholar, my job is to connect people with Zora, right? So if I don't at minimum make you feel curious about her, make you leave and say, oh, I'm gonna start doing a little bit of my own research, or oh, now when I pass this town, now when I go to Disney, I know it's just it's 6 miles from Orlando. I can swing by or I can read one of her books. If I have not done that, I failed, right? And I think like that's one of when I talk about giving grace and like really being centered and grounded and forming connection with these places and spaces. That's why I love what I do because I get to talk about it in a different way. Because I love Zora. And that's my goal to get people to at least be interested in her. It's not self-aggrandizing. If I tell you everything I know about Zora, that does nothing for me if you leave and you don't feel no connection.
Right, right, right.
I
I
failed.
want, I want to say something on the camera that I said in private. It's not nothing bad. I think that you're the Zora scholar because your passion you have naturally for it. I told Dr. Wade this in private. If you were one of those scholarly people and you came with your little PhD in Zora and I did all the classes over here at this certain school, the family might not taking you in like that. But
Yeah.
you're coming from a pure, curious, interested, advocate Zora place. The family could feel that. The family could resonate with that. And so the family giving you that blessing, like, man, you a real one. You're not coming over here for some other kind of reason.
Yeah.
You can tell. You can see between that, you know?
Yeah, and I received that. And one thing I can say is like the academics that I have worked with, talked with, they have been so welcoming. And a lot of them, like they're really excited about the way that even I do it because I'm really big. I want us all to be talking about Zora. Zora's legacy is so expansive, right? And so in that way, I'm kind of more of a connector and I can have the conversations with the academics because most academics are going to have like their area of focus. And so I'm like, okay, let's bring it all together so we can celebrate and honor Zora and like share our information. But I would say, I see some of them kind of let their hair down. Like even when me and Dr. Kendi talk, it's just like, hey, but I teach my son about Zora. Today he had hat day at school. And he had, you saw it. He wanted to rep Zora for his hat day. She co founded the Hilltop student newspaper at Howard in 1924 and named it. And so I bought him back a Hilltop hat in February when I was there. And he was like, oh, yep, this is Zora's newspaper. And so that same interest that I can craft in him, academics is the same. Like none of us know everything about Zora. And for me, it is a lifelong thing. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a lifelong thing because the lady, that's my girl. Like we argue in my head. I'll be like, oh, my bad. I'm about to tell your business. Like it's.
Yeah, for real, for real. So let's transition a little bit to your children's book, right? Zora's Garden. So tell us, once again, I love hearing for the artists, the light bulb moment you was driving or in the shower or whatever, where it's like, you know what? I'm gonna do a book about Zora. But then you made the choice to make a children's book, not necessarily a novel, right? So tell us about that choice of making it a children's book, because I heard a scholar say last night, Dr. Kaba, it's one thing to know something. It's another thing to teach it, but it's a third thing to be able to put it to where a child can get it. I like whenever he said that.
Yeah,
So tell
yeah.
us about putting that into where it's digestible for a child. Tell us about the importance.
Yeah, so it's actually right behind me, Zora's Garden. Actually, I owe it to my son. I actually owe it to him because during the pandemic, we was in the house. He was only 4. We was bored out of our minds, and we needed something to do. And so from my summer camp days, I had like all of these seeds left over. We used to do a planting project in summer camp. And so I was like, oh, let's see. Like we had never started a garden. I was like, let's see if we can get these seeds to grow. And what had happened, so we started a little windowsill garden, and everything just, he liked to say his favorite color used to be red, and mine used to be purple. And he said, Mama has a purple thumb, I have a red thumb. Now mine is red because Zora's is red and his is orange. But these plants just started growing everywhere. So in the backyard, it's funny, the house that we used to live in, the woman had raised bed gardens. Now the wood was all rotten and everything, but I was like, well, what do we have to lose? And we need something to do to pass the time. So we started a garden and he named it Zora's Garden. At 4, he named it Zora's Garden. So every day we used to go work in Zora's Garden, and we figured out we are very good gardeners. In my research, I uncovered, they didn't have this language then, but for mental health and for sustenance, Zora always gardened. If she lived anywhere long enough, she gardened, and she was essentially a master gardener. And so I was like, oh, this is dope. Like, but I had no idea that it was going to become a children's book. In fact, I was like, it would be cool if we could plant these gardens, which I still want to do. If anybody's watching that can help me do this, plant all of these little Zora's gardens all over. And then it came to me because me and my son were in the garden, and to pass the time, we would make up stories. And I was already a children's author, so I was like, "Hey, I wonder if I could do this." And Zora left so much. Like she talked about her childhood. There are facts mixed in with the fiction of Zora's Garden, and it's my imagining of her as a little girl growing up in Eatonville, gardening with her mom and learning how to tell stories. And so yeah, it kind of just very organically happened.
I love every step of your story. It's so natural. It's not forced. What does even playing sound like? A lot of this
Oh,
stuff is just this is
none
how
of
life
it.
comes. Look, people always think in January I'm gonna do a vision board and all this stuff on the board, and I got my Word Excel spreadsheet and all these data and trajectories and graphs. Like, no, that's
No.
not how my life goes. Things really just organically as you on the path is unfolding.
Yeah.
That's how my life is as well, you know.
Yeah, it's really saying yes. I mean, even starting with that summer camp when they were like, "Oh, we should do this for summer camp." I don't have any education background. In fact, like my degrees are in business. I have 2 business degrees. And so to be a Zora Neale Hurston scholar, again, unexpected. But it's really saying yes. A lot of times it's saying yes because you don't know until you experience it, right? If it fits or if it doesn't. And you can always say, like, I did it, that doesn't work for me. I'm gonna do something else. And I mean, I was raised blue collar family. You were supposed to not vision boards, but you had to have all of your plans laid out. But how do you know? Because you're only, until you've experienced it, it's only an idea. It's only what you think is going to be like. And you don't know until you get there.
I think you ought to still do that Zora Garden project because coincidentally, the books I've been reading in fiction recently, back in the old times, right, like slavery times and things of that nature, right, Reconstruction time even, but there's always a character in the book that's talking to the plants. They talk to
Yes.
the plants. You realize how much our ancestors was connected to the nature, the trees, the bushes, the herbs, understanding what could heal you and what could hurt you. And all of these things go back to talking and telling stories with the plants, man. I think it's a good thing you on with that, sis.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I mean, even now, so it's so funny. Cam, his birthday is 2 days before Zora's. So that's another little thing. Like I get so much of a feeling of who she was as a child based off of his behavior and just how smart he is. And he like they have their own relationships. So talking to the plants, talking to the ancestors, talking to the elders, like it's all so important. And especially as Black people and people of color, that's ingrained in us. It's just like Zora say, we carry the African drum under our skin, right? And I can tell you, I stepped foot in Ghana, and even when it ain't music playing, you feel like this rhythm, like you feel it. And so I think just what you said, connecting to nature That's so much of our folklore. It's our birthright. And it's funny because Cam has these birds. He has these birds that knock on his window every day. I put them things in the story so y'all can go to my page and see Cam's birds. And so I was
I
saying that it was
saw it.
my granddad. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, so this one is my granddad. And he was like, I wish it was Zora. Next day, it's two of them. It's there's two of them, and they knock on his window. I will walk up to the window. Sometimes they don't even go away. And I talk to the birds. I'm like, good morning. How y'all doing? Yes. Yep. The
You
plant.
know, living in the South in Louisiana, and we're so disconnected in this generation because guess what? So many people go on their app now, not even shopping anymore. You do the Instacart.
Hmm.
You're not even going to Walmart. You're not even going to your local grocery store. We're that disconnected from going in the garden, planting something, tending to it, and then the feeling you get from taking it, going in your kitchen and cooking with your own peppers and herbs and ingredients. You're making a meal that's hearty. Like I did every part of this from my. That's a different level of pride you have.
Yeah.
And I went on a little app right quick. I bought some peppers. I bought some chicken. We removed from every part of the process our ancestors treasured, killing the chickens, killing the whatever, and doing a process over it to make the food. Like there's so many things that's lost in this generation of time.
You know what? I would give us some grace there too, because all of our ancestors. I remember my grandma. All my grandpa. Well, three of them, three of the four, were all from down south. And my grandma, she grew up in Mitchell County, Georgia. I was like, your town didn't even have a name. It was just Mitchell County, right? And the land that she grew up on dated back to slavery. My grandmother was not for that. And I understand that there is trauma, and we must recognize that there is trauma and there's healing that needs to take place when we talk about reconnecting with the land, because there is memory, right? Epigenetics. So it's still passed down, that we know the traumas that we experience being forced to do that labor, right? And not being able to live and be human. And so I will also say, like, as we are looking up how do we reconnect, we can't put so much emphasis on the disconnect, but just the healing, because it is. I mean, once you get into it, we got me and Cam got our seeds started over here. We're gonna grow some stuff on the patio because we love it. And it's so amazing. It's so amazing. It opens a different consciousness when you have grown something
I'm sure.
yourself.
I'm
Yeah.
sure it does, man. And you know, a lot of cities and different places in the country have these food deserts, right? And you have a lack of good vegetation. You have a lack of good produce. They're doing things with all this herbicides and other kind of things that they're using, pesticides. It's a crazy thing. So to be able to control your own food is kind of getting more and more vital as time is going by, and they're trying to control more and more things. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we love it though. We love the garden. I'm glad
Yeah,
Zora like
yeah,
introduced us to it, because even our connection with it, the winters here are brutal. Like, just even if we don't have a lot of snow, like you don't get a lot of sun, which I know my soul exists below the Mason-Dixon line. The store got the wrong address, but my son, like, it's beautiful to see that he'll say, like, he brought it up. He was like, "Can we plant some seeds? Can we start some seeds?" So he's having that connection. But even then, like, he was able to tell his babysitter, ask her, did she want to plant some seeds? And
you
so
know
I
what I'm saying?
that's how it happens. The more organic
Yeah.
it happens, the better it'll be. Like, I'm
Yes.
not into forcing or shaming anybody, because
No.
it's so much that comes with our history.
Mhm. Yes. I agree.
So much.
I agree. I agree. So I want to do a little caveat on the children's book concept just for our listeners. Some of
Yeah.
our audience are fellow authors and they want to be authors and stuff like that. So I know a lot of people, if they want to write a book,
Yeah.
but they think, I'm going to do a shortcut. I'm going to do a children's book instead of sitting down and doing a full-out novel. They thinking it's a detour, right? I'm gonna put a fast. Talk
Hmm.
about the process of making a children's book, and I know it entails a lot of illustration because you got to have visuals for the kids, and getting the illustrator could be a whole tab within itself. I understand that, and try to make it a story into a children's story. Talk
Yeah.
about some of that. It's not easy as it might sound in your mind. You thinking I'm gonna just do a children's book.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Well, first off, I'll tell you that a children's book is actually more expensive to produce than
Yes, I
than
always tell my friends that.
yeah, like a nonfiction or fiction
Yeah.
full-length manuscript
Yes,
because
ma'am.
illustrations are expensive. The color printing is expensive. But with children, I feel like children and elders, they the most brutal audiences. 'Cause either they don't like it or they're not. And I remember, and I've been doing this since 2015, 2014, 2014. And I remember I had written a book and it was called What Goes In Must Come Out, which you can guess what that was about. Trying to actually still teach about healthy eating and things like that, but just the digestive system.
That was creative.
It did not hit though. It did not hit at all. And so I mean, it's a practice. It's craft, right? Just coming up with the story, the brevity will make or break you. When you write a children's book, brevity is your best friend, but it's such a talent. Like, it really is a talent to keep them engaged. And even one thing I'll say, you gotta think about if you really wanna read your book to children, because that's the other part. You're gonna get most sales because you're reading and engaging with children. And so if you don't really have a passion for children and children being children, like, that already, like, that whole sit down, be quiet, be still, that ain't children ain't never been made to do that. Number one, but just the process. I mean, coming up with the story, um, it's a lot of crafting. It's a lot of making sure you have a clear vision. It's not just you that's publishing this story. You need a team, right? So you write the story, but you need a team from your editor, depends on how much editing you need. Um, the illustrations, that was one of the things that made me bite my nails to the nub, right? With Zora's Garden. Because
You
I was
said something important. You said something important just now. I think that these people thinking, whereas a children's book, I don't need editors. I don't need to pay all this money in editing. It's a picture book. It's like a sentence or two per page. Why I gotta pay for editors, Sean?
I mean, you don't have, I mean, listen, you don't have to. I recommend it. Like, I recommend it because even it's this illustration. They talk about how you envision drawing a horse and how it comes out. You may have all of these things in your mind, but it may not be clear to someone else. And I think it's really good practice on getting feedback, because once you release the book, you're gonna get a whole lot of feedback, whether you want it or not. Even with Zora's Garden, this is the first edition. There's a fact sheet that talks about the real Zora Neale Hurston, and it's an error on it, which is devastating. I had three different editors. These mistakes make it through, but the core story, had I not put so much emphasis on that, it wouldn't have been what it is. You know, I had other writers even come in and say like, "Oh yeah, I think this, you could play this part up here, or I think this should be the first line." And you still have to make the final decision, right? Cuz it's your story, but the flow of a children's book matters so much. So much. In fact, I mean, I got my own in-house console with my son, but he like listens to the stories first, and I pay attention to where it loses him and which parts he's more interested in. And it takes that. Like, it's a lot of work.
See, once again, you had an advantage having your son being that age, right?
Yeah.
I know so many folks that came to me about children books. Either their children are grown, like mine, they got grown kids. It's been a
Mhm.
long time since you was sitting there with a 4, 5, 6 year old, or they have no kids. So one of my best friends has 30 or 40 children books, right?
Mm.
But he's
Mhm.
in his 60s. He's in
Okay.
his 60s. So I got invited to come and read to a kindergarten class in a
Mhm.
local school.
Mhm.
But I have children books. I said, oh, what an opportunity. I'm going to get Keith. You can read one of your books to the kids. He realized in real time something that he thought was a simple thing to understand. The children was like, what was that?
Mhm.
What was that? Well,
Yep.
who's that? He realized he had to go back to the drawing board. Like, I got to rewrite all of this. And
Yes.
what I thought in my mind versus in real time with these kids it's not matching up.
It's not matching up. It is not. It's even like when you read something in your head and you read it out loud, you're gonna read with a different cadence. And I think, yeah, that's a really big benefit because even reading chapter books to my son, like the length of reading and even a breath, which is we're getting into the very granular now, but it's a lot
I
that goes
like that.
into because it's
Keep
it's a performance, right?
it going.
And again, going back to what I was saying about Zora, it's the same thing with reading a book. If I'm not connecting you to the story and the character, I fail. And that's one of my biggest tips. So I never focus on finishing the book with a group of kids. I focus on their engagement. That was the same metric that we use for summer camp and after school. Are they engaged? So if I get 2, 3 pages in and I have to ask them questions, I have them come up and help. Okay, we have some bees in the book. How many bees do we see? Count them out. Did we miss any? You take that time because if you can create a positive experience,
You gonna remember.
that's really what matters. And then the other big thing is I really push for it. People ask me to come read. I will waive 90% of the time my speaker's fee for every kid to get a book. Because once if
Wow.
you connect with it and then I take
Wow.
it away, like what was the point of that? I don't like that.
That's powerful what you just said. I like that. I
Yeah,
like
like
what you
I would
said.
rather them have the book. Like, oh, they fell in love with Zora and then Zora goes away. It's a
Yeah,
missed opportunity.
yeah, yeah. And what you just said is important about reading aloud because I always advise my author friends do your audio book yourself, or even without doing that, try to read your stuff aloud to your friends or do a voice note.
Yep.
So, one of my recent projects coming out in a couple of weeks, the proof copy came. I made myself read it aloud,
Yeah.
200 plus pages. Because most times as an adult, you haven't read aloud in years.
In years. Yeah.
And like you said, it sounded good when I wrote it, but not that I'm literally saying it. Like, this word shouldn't be here. Take that out. Take this out. Add this. You start seeing that
Yeah.
in that aloud process. So it's
Ooh,
about a part of the editing.
it's a lot in there. And then, like, okay, so getting back into the cost when we talk about illustrations for a children's book. I mean, I actually just got rejected from a bookstore and they was like, we love the story, but we think the illustrations could use some work. Which I love my book. Like, I let me see. I love this book. I
Yeah, see, let us see it. Yeah,
I love this book.
yeah, that's right.
This is
That's
my
right.
like this is the answer why it's taking me 10 years to learn how to do this. But even like in the back, we have coloring pages
That's important.
for the
That's important.
like of the illustrations and fact sheets.
Yeah,
I love this book, but I still get rejected and things like that.
it's a
It's
part
such
of the game.
learning. It's part
Part
of
of the game.
the game, and
Yeah, it happens. And
it's a
uh,
game, and it's very subjective.
um, always, all of this is right. All of this
Yes.
is. I love that. And the man just came into the room like right on time. Boy, God working all kind of ways right now. My man, Mr. LA in the building, right? But for the past year, I love talking to my guests about AI technology because the book that Kofi and myself made last year about the modern day griot,
Mm-hmm.
we went and used AI to make our illustrations. When I
Mm,
tell you we shaved off hundreds of dollars in graphics
mm,
by making ourselves sick, it was a tedious process. But learning how to make our own images with the AI, and it came out perfectly in the book. The crowd still loved it. Everybody enjoyed it. And we saved tons of money just training ourselves how to use. And the man in the room right now that put me onto it, so much props to the brother. But we use our own images. I'm proud about that.
mm.
I'm proud about having our own images.
That's if I could be an illustrator. So I'm huge. My illustrator, she's actually in Argentina, and we have a very close relationship because I give her so much business. I from my first book, I'm probably down to 3 times, like it's 3 times less the cost of my first book with illustrations. And just knowing like the process, like having an illustrator creating layers versus create a single layer illustration. So if you have to make changes, things like that, it's a lot to it. It doesn't matter if it's a learning curve and you really have to commit to it. And there's always something to learn. There is always something to
So
learn.
let's connect that together with the brand new Dr. Elam Ace Kendi, Barracoon, the young adult adaptation. As I mentioned earlier, I went to the actual book signing at Baldwin and Company. It was incredible seeing a brand new audience
Yeah.
attract to Zora. And we're focusing on children right now. But when I tell you it was 100 plus grown ups in the room,
Yep.
and they're talking about Zora and Barracoon and Cujo and Eaton, the whole nine. Not many adults in the room even knew.
Yeah.
This
Yep.
is the importance of us reimagining these stories, brushing them up, polishing them off, reintroducing. We're in Louisiana, right?
Hmm.
They mentioned somewhere in Alabama, right? And we only like from New Orleans, like 2.5 hours from that location, and
Hmm.
nobody ever heard of it. Nobody been there. He asked the question, and no hands went up at all.
Mm.
Only a 2 hour drive. Like this is how it's important us to bring these stories back in your face, man.
Yeah, I mean, but New Orleans itself is Zora territory. So she initiated into voodoo there. She stayed in Algiers for the great majority of her time, and she studied with a guy who said he was the nephew of Marie Laveau. And so, yeah, like just like you were saying about the postman, there's so much history just around us, but it's how we present it, and a lot of times it's who presents it. That's the real of it. It's who presents it. You know, there are certain things you can receive from Dr. Kendi, who's prolific and profound. There are certain things that you can receive from me, right? There are certain things you'll receive from Carla Kaplan, certain things you'll receive from Valerie Boyd, and it all goes to giving Zora her flowers and connecting us to this new era of her. And so I love it. I mean, Dr. Kendi's 3 books into a 6 book adaptation of Zora's work into children's literature. And he is doing a phenomenal job. You can't
Mm,
say nothing bad about Dr. Kendi to me. I tell
right, right. So I don't know what you can and can't disclose, but like that's some other projects he's doing. You talk about that even a little bit. You like touch on it, like not say anything. I don't
Look
know.
at you trying to get me fired.
Okay, well
I don't
let's
know.
not.
No,
Let's not.
no, there's some really good stuff coming out, and we right now at the trust with Dr. Kendi as our partner, we're talking about how to really amp up the marketing, right? So we can reach a wider audience, and people do know because that's one of the very valuable things about children's books. It's the adults that are reading the children's books with the children, right? So we always learning. I say knowing is passive, remembering is active, right? And so when those little simple lessons that children's books have in them, then we get reminded as well. So Dr. Kenny, he has some amazing stuff coming down the pipeline. Y'all
Yeah,
follow
'cause
the Zora Neale Hurston Trust on Instagram so you can keep up
yeah,
with everything that's
yeah,
happening.
yeah. Because even myself, the past few years, I love reading young adult novels. So I'm
Yes.
always on my page advocating literacy. I know that everybody not sitting down reading a 600-page stamp from the beginning, but
Yeah.
you might read Jason Reynolds and him doing stamp. You
Yep.
might read How to Be an Anti-Racist for Children. You might read some of these other adaptations to get your feet wet, and then you
Mm.
can graduate to the bigger project if you feel the need to. So these
Yeah.
folks doing these adaptations are very vital for our literacy community.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So let's go forward from that. Let's talk about you being the founder, one of the leading people in the Zora Neale Hurston Trust, how that came about, what does that look like as far as your roles, if you will, in the
Yeah.
day-to-day of that? Can you talk about that?
Yes, I'm actually not a founder member. Don't try to get me fired, Sean P. I'm the director of programs, and I'm the first. So I guess
Director, yes.
the inaugural director of programs for the Zora
There,
Neale Trust. And
gotcha.
really, Dr. Kendi himself is truly special to me because what happened with the trust was 2022. Eatonville's library, that same library I visited in 2018, the branch manager wanted to do a Zora series. And she was like, hey, would you be interested in coming to be our scholar for the series? And I was like, I'm not a Zora scholar. Like, so this is fairly recent, like 2022, right? And that was actually September 2021. They applied for a Florida Humanities Council grant to do a 3-day 4-event Zora program where it was just me talking about her for all these events and giving a walk-in tour of the hometown. And so I was adamant. I was like, I'm not a Zora Neale Hurston scholar. The Florida Humanities is not going to prove that. Y'all are wasting y'all time. And the Florida Humanities approved the grant. So in January 2022, I talked about Zora for about 10 hours across 3 days, gave a walk-in tour of her hometown, and it was
You said
amazing.
10 hours.
Yeah, it equaled out to about
Wow.
10 hours.
Incredible.
Yeah, yeah. And so then we get into the summer of 2022. And I had actually written a trust because of my research of Zora, her family as a whole challenges what we know about the history of Black people in this country. And I think that they could be a great model to start re-examining, especially Southern Black families. Because even her mom, like she was born in Alabama, Nottasuga, Alabama, as was Zora's father. But Lucy Potts Hurston came from land owning Negroes. And in fact, they had so much abundance that Lucy Potts Hurston had a trust. This woman was born in December 1865. And I'm like, wait a minute, what? She got married when she was 16. It was written out of the trust because she married Zora's dad. But when we talk about the Hurston family, what they achieved and how they lived and how they raised their children in this pioneering family, it's a lot of questions that need to be asked that will, I think, open our minds to be curious about Black folks. So I wrote the trust and I was like, hey, uh, pretty much like, what's up? And they responded in 24 hours, which I've heard that has not happened ever before. And we're like, we would love to work with you. Actually, we are aware of some
24
paperwork.
hours.
Yeah, it was like really, really quick. It was really, really quick. And the first thing that happened, they asked me to interview Dr. Kendi, and that was September 2022. And I think I wrote them in August. Yeah, in August 2022. And they are very careful about who they work with and everything. And so I'm like, okay, cool. So they asked me to interview Dr. Kendi, which that first interview, you can watch it on the Trust YouTube channel. And I call him Ibram the
Yeah.
whole time. He never corrected me. And I still to this day, I'm like, Dr. Kendi, why didn't you correct me? He's like, Ray, it's fine.
I do the same thing on my name. I do the same thing. I'm like,
Listen, 'cause
you keep going. Keep
listen,
going.
I'm gonna mispronounce a word. I'm gonna mispronounce a name. Y'all blame it, charge it to my head, not my heart. My
That's right.
tongue. This
That's
ain't my
right.
native language. That's what I like to say.
Come on now. Come on now.
But it started with me interviewing him, and I was only supposed to do one interview. And it was interesting because Janine Cook of the founder of Ida's Bookshop and Harriet's Bookshop in Collingswood, New Jersey, and Philadelphia, their sister bookshops. Dr. Kendi was set to do a talk the same day I was interviewing him via Zoom. And an author friend connected me and Janine invited me to Philly to be at the talk, but I didn't know what the talk was. My son was out of town with his dad. I was like, oh, yeah, like, let me see how I can make this work. I ain't had no money at the time. I'm like, let me see how I could possibly make this work. I used a firm to get a flight to go to Philly, and it happened to be Dr. Kendi's talk for Magnolia Flower. So I interviewed him on Zoom, changed my shirt, ran to the thing, and got to meet him in person and give him a copy of Zora's Garden for Amani. And so it's just supposed to be that one thing. They were like, yeah, we're going to figure out how the trust said we're going to figure out how we want to work together. That went really well. And then the next interview was Elizabeth Alexander, executive director of the Mellon Foundation. And I was not supposed to do that interview. The young lady who was supposed to interview her had a dental emergency. I was at an academic, not an academic, after school conference, keynoting, doing a presentation and vending. And it was like, is it any way you could do this? And so I was able to pull it off. And after that, when they were like, just do all of them. By November, they were like, we're thinking about starting to do some events for Zora, which they haven't done. And this is Zora's family. Like, I want to make that clear. The trust is made up of Zora's familial heirs. So this is her family. It's their mission to protect and promote the literary legacy and estate of Zora Neale Hurston worldwide. Literary, anthropological, all her stuff. This is her family. So I'm like, okay. And they're like, could you do it? So we started talking about that, and very quickly it became like, just we think you should just do all of our programs. So it's, yeah.
I mean, once again, the whole time we've talked for this past time, your story is just magical. Every step of the way is
Thank
just
you.
so much grace and blessings and ordained, lined up alignment just happening through the whole thing, man.
I would really say it has to be aligned. Valerie Boyd, I remember after I did that first presentation in 2018, I started reading Wrapped in Rainbows, the leading biography. Oh my goodness. Valerie Boyd did such a beautiful job with Zora's biography. And in her dedication, she says, "Thank you, Zora, for choosing me." And I remember I broke down crying because I felt like I had no business even talking about Zora. And so I was like, how do you know if Zora chose you? And what's the chances Zora would ever choose me? I would say she makes it clear because there have been some things that have happened. It's just absolutely unbelievable. Like it defies logic. Even right behind me, these green books, they are first edition Library of America books, the Cheryl Wall books that she did, and she found Zora's autobiography. Cheryl Wall did. So
That's crazy.
and so these books, Zora's great niece actually sent me for my birthday.
Jeez, what a gift.
And I've been doing this
What a
for
gift.
7 years. They
Yes.
were published when I was 7. My son is 7, and Zora was born on the 7th. And her inscription in it made me cry. She's like, "Happy birthday to Ray,
Come
Zora's
on, man.
angel and scholar." And
That magic seven,
that's 7.
the guide number, the guide number, the seven. And you said something that sparked my mind of something I wanted to ask you earlier, but it's a good time right now to transition.
Mhm.
Let's go into the research of this whole thing. I love asking my guests about their research and the process, what that even looks like. I know you was in the archives I saw one time. You know, you really delicate stuff you got to deal with, got to get permission and whatnot. Like, what's it like actually being in there?
Everyone is different. So I had gone to Eatonville in 2021 because I really wanted to start doing sense of place research, but I had no idea about how to get into collections. I'm an everyday girl, just like down there, and I'm like, I'm gonna go see the place. And I think like that's one of the greatest gifts Zora has given me because I was born that way, just to go, just to go and see and do and just like be open. And it kind of, got trained out of me. But now I kind of live like that all over again without holding on too tightly to a plan. Being in the space is magical. I got off the plane and went to see Pasha Baker at the Goldsboro Museum, which is up in Sanford, only 16 miles from Eatonville. And it was actually founded by the blood brother of the founder of Eatonville. So Papa William Clark was the blood brother of Joe Clark. I was like, the black people, they don't want us to know. These are the things that we got to find out for ourselves. And so actually Pasha was like, have you ever been to the collection at the University of Florida? I'm like, no. And so she gives me the email to the person, but this is still the pandemic. So it's closed to the public. She was like, if they give you any trouble, let me know. So I email, they respond, "Oh, Dr. Chesney, we would love to hear you come." I'm not a doctor. I don't even have a master's degree. So they're like, just come on. So my ex-husband now, but at the time we were married, we drove 2 hours, right? And we were driving 2 hours. I had him driving everywhere, 2 hours to go just see and be in the place. And for me, that first collection will always be special because I didn't know that I could go into them. Me being me, I didn't know I could go into them. But the fact that you're touching things that Zora touched and that were in her house, because I'm in a phase, it's really bad. It's a little bit obsessive. Now it's less about secondary sources. I'm like, can I go to the primary source? And even going to the archives at Yale, I got to see the handwritten Their Eyes Are Watching God manuscript, which was completely not planned. I was actually there to surprise one of Zora's great nieces for her baby shower. And we're friends. Like the Hurstons, they as close to me as family could be, right? Like even my son has relationships with the Hurstons. I talk to a Hurston probably every day now. I was there for the baby shower, but I'm like, oh, Yale's right here. I had slept in Zora's great niece's little 4-year-old bed. And I told her, hey, if I break this, I promise you I'll pay for it. Because a 4-year-old bed is real small. But I showed up at the archives at Yale in the t-shirt I had slept in. I was supposed to fly out that day. And I just asked if I could see it. It's restricted. You have to have the archivist permission to see it. And they told me, they were like, yeah, you probably aren't going to be able to see it. researchers and scholars write in months in advance. They share some of their research and talk about how this adds to their research. And I'm just like, hey, I would love to see it. I love Zora. I would love to see it. But it's also, I don't feel entitled, right? I don't feel entitled to be able to have access to these things. It's just like really grateful. I'm like, hey, I would love to see it. I understand if I can't in the future, I'll reach out. And initially, someone, I think it may have been an archivist assistant, had said, like, well, it's digitized. It's digitized online. I'm like, that's cool, but like, I kind of want to touch it. The little kid in me, I'm like,
No, no, we're not doing that.
I kind of want to
Not
touch
doing. You got to touch that thing.
Yeah, and the archivist responded and was like, with this, she responded shortly thereafter and was like, with this email, I give you permission to see it. And when I saw it, I actually broke down crying. First off, I was like, where's the police officers? Like, they ain't got, like, they're not gonna watch you. I ain't gotta wear white gloves in here. But at the same time, like, it was so emotional because I'm thinking about Zora in 1936 being in Haiti and writing Henry Allen Moe, the secretary for the Guggenheim Foundation, and telling him, like, I'm able to write this book because you guys gave me funding. Like that right there is so deep. Like that's a forever conversation
Bruh,
about
yes, it is.
artists and funding. And
Yes,
she's
it
writing
is.
this book and but thanking him. This book that is considered her seminal text. And I'm touching the paper that Zora wrote in pencil. All the
Mm.
places. And it's funny because the opening passage, everybody can quote it. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. Some come in with the tide and some float on the horizon. And so she had actually crossed that out, which as a writer, that changed me so deeply because I was like, even Zora vacillated about like what she was writing.
Because once
Even Zora.
again, nobody has magic just flowing out the pit. You doubting it. You don't know. Maybe it's something else. Cross it out.
She was never satisfied with anything that she wrote. Like she always wished she could do it again, which is wild. It's Zora.
And talk about the archives because about 2 months ago, I had a sister on the show, and she's getting her PhD in like African history and Caribbean studies and stuff. And she's always on her page. She in the archives. She's sharing people all kind of online resources. Like that's her thing, right? And then
Mhm,
the sister I had on the show like about a couple of weeks ago, she's a genealogist. So
mhm.
again, you in the church files, you in the burial files, the marriage files, you in all these places seeing these big, huge, documents and whatnot. We got
Yeah.
microfiber and stuff. You got to wear gloves, but like, I'm curious about all of that as a writer, as a historian myself.
Yeah, and I mean, you can go like even Library of Congress. They have so much Zora stuff, and you just the right now, even the trust, like we're in conversation with the Library of Congress, and them, one of their big efforts, they're trying to figure out how to get the public more engaged in the archives and the resources they have available. But it is like it's still very esoteric. Like you have to know how to navigate. And even me, like I was in DC and I tried to reach out to Howard because I believe that they have the Barracoon manuscript, and I want to see the original manuscript. And I could not find the right person to talk to or get an answer. And so those types of things, it's always an issue. Archivists that I know, they talk about that, the issue even of whose work is important enough to archive and what artifacts do you preserve and who gets to make those decisions, because Zora, when she died, she was a ward of the state, and it was customary to burn all the belongings after the death. And so a lot of Zora stuff in the University of Florida, you can see the singe marks on papers and everything that burned. And I think he was the first police chief down in Fort
That's
Pierce.
a very, very horrible story. That's gut wrenching. Like, man,
Yeah,
like once again, studying so many of the ancestors and seeing on the backside of their life or in their death sometimes how some of the families handle their things or just pretty much like let some other university come and take their whole home library or y'all can just take whatever. Like
yeah,
we got to preserve our greatest one, preserve this stuff, man. I'm
yeah,
so big on that.
yeah. It's hard to figure out. I know, like my grandmother was a hoarder, and she just passed away last 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 March. And she had like my granddad died before I was even alive. She still had his glasses, she had his pay stubs. It is like what do you keep? And if you keep, like, keep it, what do you do with it, right? So that it can be preserved. So I think that's something that I love about my work. It's always starting to make me instigate other questions, right? When we talk about the trust, like how the literary estates and legacies, how are they preserved? How are they protected? How do they exist for 100 years, right? But how, right? Because we say we need to do this, we need to do this, but it's the how. It's the how, and it's a lot to it.
It is. I know we started a little bit later than I wanted to. I'm gonna end up with one last question, right? So this is kind of a fun question. Kind of a fun question. You were recently on the Kelly Clarkson show, correct?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And you've done some other things in media. I've seen your page. You done a lot of TV and stuff like that. I don't want the politically correct answer on my show. I want your real emotions of how you felt when these phone calls come. Like, man, you got the invite to this certain show, and then tell me, like, when you finally there, 3, 2, 1, you in the moment. What's that like when it's happening? Could you give us some of that essence?
Yeah, so initially it would be like really, really exciting. I kind of have like this thing, especially Zora's award. She got inducted into the Hilltop Hall of Fame in the first class. She was the first inductee just this past February. So on the trust page, we should be sharing something about that, I think, next week. But I was the one to accept the award, right? And so Kelly Clarkson, I actually had less than 24 hours notice that I needed to be on a plane to go do that. And so the logistics of it was so crazy, like getting there, especially because I was flying I already had planned to go to DC to accept Zora's award. And so I kind of have this thing where I don't think about things in the moment. I have to process after, because that's the part, like, it happens, but you still have to show up and do the thing. So I don't get too excited before, especially because that's probably my supply chain management mind. It's like the logistics, and you kind of got to fill out how everything is going to happen. Now I can say, like, I know that Zora chose me to do this work. And a lot of times I'll say, Zora, if you want me to do it, like, I'll do it. And I kind of, I don't feel the need to have to do anything or to be somewhere. It doesn't have to happen. And so for me, I don't know, it feels like really calm. Like, I feel like me and her, I feel her always smirking at me and be like, go ahead, girl, and do the thing. And you better do it how I want you to do it. And I'm like, okay. But it's wild. Like, I
And,
cannot, it's wild
um,
I have her award in my house, to
that
be
is
able to
crazy.
speak on behalf of her family,
That
having their
is crazy.
trust. Like, it's ironic, the Zora Neale Hurston trust. I have the trust of the trust.
Come
That
on now. Come on
that
now. The trust
that
of the
right
trust.
there,
You dropping
yeah,
bars.
yeah.
You
Like
dropping bars. Yeah. But no, I asked that question because, like, me coming from an athlete background, everything is super on the front emotional for athlete. You win the MVP or the rookie of the year, you win the game, it's all this crying and this. And then
yeah,
the book world is kind of like tennis or golf, where it's like, oh, I got the National Book Award for the year. Yeah. I'm like, how do
yeah.
you really feel? Like, is it really just, oh yeah, I won? Like, no, tell me how you really feel. You be like, yeah, yeah. Like, express it, get your
It's funny
get your
because
shine on.
it's funny because my son, even though he's 7, he is like my biggest fan, and him and Zora have their own relationship, and so I feel like he probably gets it a little bit more than anybody else I've known, because he drew me a birthday card. I had the flu for my birthday, but he drew me a birthday card, and he's like, I drew 3 things in here that you love most. I drew you and me together. I drew you writing, and then I drew you working for Zora. And so, like, he knows, like, this is the work. This is stuff that I would do even if it was no TV show, even if there was no awards, even if I didn't work. And I did do it, before any of that. So I think it's grounded in that, but it's like just a deep appreciation. She's changed every area of my life. And so it's not the big things happen and it means more. It's like my relationship with her on a day to day kind of grounds me. Yeah.
No, I love it. I love the response, man, because Dr. Wade and I once again talk all the time in private about, for a lot of us, we're doing so much so fast. You got
Yeah.
to really sometimes sit back, like, man, I really did do this thing last month. I
Yeah.
really did that last Tuesday. Like, we
Yeah.
call it giving yourself a monument, giving little mementos. Like, yeah, I can, it's important to have. We all like grinding, studying, staying up late, doing the adversity. Like, we got to celebrate the moments too.
Yeah, and I will say like that's one of the big shifts that I made, especially becoming a single mom. Like it's balanced out so much. It's not a grind for me, especially because this is like the long game. Like it is a lot of hard work, especially the stuff that I'm doing for the trust. But at the same time, it's so important for me that my son see, you know, me as a woman, as a mom who like actually enjoys what she does. So even
Yes.
today, this is the only thing I did today. I was like, I'm not gonna do any work. I took a long nap. I walked on the treadmill. I putzed around the house. Like that's important too, to be able to enjoy it and kind of process it and really absorb it into my being.
I got one last freestyle question that I was thinking about last night for you. You're doing so much with the archives and the trust and all this stuff for Zora, right? So how
Uh-huh.
does that help you on a subconscious level? I guess like archiving your own life and archiving for your legacy and for your children and for your grand. Like, what do you think about in a prevention? In a future phase, like, let me start storing this now. Let me start
Yeah.
putting together things. Do you think about that at all for
I
yourself?
do. So I'm like really obsessive about like taking pictures and little
Okay.
video snippets. That's one
Okay.
of the big things because memory is like, oh, it'll fail you. I'm like, I just talked to Dr. Kitty. I can't remember if it was this Monday, last Monday. It goes by so fast. So I'm really big
Yes.
on taking pictures, or even if
Yeah.
I have a big meeting or something, I might like record a little couple seconds after it. Just even as I'm working on Dear Zora, which I need to finish my book because I've been writing
Yeah.
letters to Zora since I started this, and I write them on my phone. I write them on papers, all types of things. And I put out a work in progress edition, but I still have to
So
finish.
dear Zora, graphics.
Yeah, and I imagine like having a vault where I add pictures to those letters that I'm writing to her, something like that.
That's
Because
good.
it is, you know, when we look at the Alice Walkers and the Toni Morris and the Maya Angelou, it's like, how did you become? We typically meet people as they have already evolved into who we know them as
Yes.
opposed to seeing a journey. And I'm like,
Yes.
I love that I know for
Yeah.
me, I love to share.
Yeah.
My son keep me real humble because it don't matter what I'm doing. He like, you go make my breakfast. Or like you
Yeah.
gotta sit down and play these Beyblades. And I think that
Right.
is so beautiful. And that's one of the best healing things for me with Zora. She gave me a blueprint in how to be human, right? How to be
Gotta be
a
human.
human aspiring to do something great,
Yes,
but
ma'am.
still making mistakes and still trying to figure it out and still having doubts. And so most people celebrate her for all she achieved. I like to celebrate her for being, like, for being.
For being.
Mhm.
They say just be, right? Just be.
Absolutely.
And that is the way we close out the show, man. Thank y'all very much for the comments. The comments was popping the whole entire time. Thanks for all that came. Those watching it later on in the YouTube space, still leave a comment. I will reply back. Thank y'all very much. Let the audience know where to find you on the gram, where to find you on the website. Give them all your 411.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram mostly at Ray Chesney, RAECHESNY, raychesney.com. Definitely make sure you follow the Zora Neale Hurston Trust at Zora Neale Hurston Trust on Instagram, zoranealehurston.com for the website for the trust, zoranealehurston.net for the store. And yeah, YouTube at Zora Neale Hurston Trust. We got some really exciting things coming down the pipeline that you guys do not want to miss.
You don't want to miss it. Trust me. So thank y'all very much. This has been Sean from the Sean P Experience. I thank you for being my guest today. And for those that's watching next Tuesday, don't miss it. I have the author of Ride or Die. Will be here next Tuesday evening. You'll see the flyer coming soon. The man Sean P. Peace. Don't leave, sister.
All right.